Carlos Alcaraz has fallen at Indian Wells and says goodbye to the chance of achieving a historic hat-trick in the California desert. His 16-match winning streak at the tournament came to an end in a chaotic match, full of controversy, with Jack Draper playing the best tennis of his career. But what really happened? Why did Alcaraz have such an irregular match? And what role did the double VAR play in changing the course of the encounter? Stick around until the end because Carlitos has revealed the reasons behind his defeat. Carlos Alcaraz couldn't get past Jack Draper and lost in the Indian Wells semifinals with a scoreline of 6-1, 0-6, 6-4. A result that perfectly reflects how strange the match was. The Spaniard, champion in 2023 and 2024, started in the worst possible way, giving away the first set in just 23 minutes and with a worrying 38% first serve percentage. But then he responded in brutal fashion, taking the second set 6-0, as if he had suddenly woken up. Everything was decided in a third set where the tennis leveled out and both players showed their best. However, when the score was 1-1, 15-15, the match's major controversy occurred. Mohamed Lahayani, the chair umpire, called a double bounce from Draper, which would have given the point to Alcaraz. But the Brit requested a video review. And that's when the chaos began. The replay showed there was no double bounce, so the umpire decided to replay the point. So far, everything seemed normal. But Draper wasn't satisfied and requested another review, this time to check if his shot had been affected by the chair umpire's early call. A second VAR review on the same point. And this time, the decision favored the Brit, point for Draper, 15-30. Carlos couldn't believe it. He approached the net to speak with his opponent, but the scoreboard had already tilted in favor of the Brit. Draper took advantage of the confusion and closed the game with a break, forcing Alcaraz to fight from behind in the decisive set. Was the decision fair? Should the point have gone to Draper? Those are questions that will remain unanswered, but it was clearly a turning point in the match. The Brits' morale skyrocketed, while Alcaraz, although he kept fighting, could no longer regain control of the match. If you're enjoying this analysis, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. Despite the controversial point, Draper played an outstanding match and won it on his own merit. With the score at 2-5 in the third set, Alcaraz tried to mount pressure, taking 2 consecutive games to close the gap to 4-5. But the Brit held his nerve, confidently closed out his service game, and sealed the most important victory of his career. This result not only eliminates Alcaraz from the title race, but it also gives Draper his first Masters 1000 final and a spot in the world's top 10 for the first time in his career. At just 23 years old, the Brit has shown he's ready for big things, and this Indian Wells could be the beginning of a new era in his career. And what did Carlos Alcaraz say after the loss? The Spaniard admitted he didn't play his best match but made it clear the conditions didn't help. It was a weird day. I couldn't find my best rhythm, I couldn't consistently do damage, and the wind didn't help either, he said after the match. He also acknowledged his poor start but felt he had found control in the second set. Until things turned again. He also addressed the controversial VAR moment. Without making excuses, Alcaraz hinted at his frustration with the umpire's decision. I'd never seen 2 reviews on the same point before. It was strange, but that's tennis. Draper took advantage of the moment and played very well for the rest of the match. Despite the disappointment, the Mercian is keeping a cool head and already focusing on the upcoming tournaments. With Indian Wells behind him, his next big goal is the Miami Masters 1000, where he'll try to bounce back and return to winning ways. For his part, Draper will face Holger Rune in the final, who defeated Daniil Medvedev 7-5, 6-4 in the other semifinal. We'll have a new champion at Indian Wells, something that hadn't happened since 2021, when Cameron Norrie surprised everyone with his title. After the stumble against Jack Draper, Carlos Alcaraz didn't take long to speak out. In his press conference, the Mercian was honest, self-critical, and made very clear what, in his view, led to his unexpected defeat. The first reason, his own level at the start of the match. I probably played the worst set of my entire career, he confessed bluntly. A disastrous start that marked the rest of the match and from which it was hard to recover mentally. According to Alcaraz, the tactical approach to the match was wrong. Instead of focusing on his aggressive and creative style, he tried to adjust his game to Draper's errors, waiting for the Brit to miss instead of imposing his rhythm. That change in mindset completely threw him off. I didn't know what to do to counter his game, he admitted. And Draper played fast, powerful tennis with surprising physical solidity. Another key factor he mentioned was psychological fatigue. Realizing he couldn't dominate points like in previous rounds and feeling uncomfortable on court directly affected his confidence. And although he had a strong reaction in the second set, that show of strength wasn't enough to turn the match around. The third set was more tactical and tense, and that's where the tactical errors and the infamous controversial point ended up tipping the scales in the Brits' favor. But there's more. Alcaraz also pointed to an external reason that can't be ignored: the surface change at Indian Wells. After more than 25 years using the same material on the courts, the organizers changed the resin system, making the surface faster and with a lower bounce. A change that, though subtle for some, directly affects Carlos's style, which is based on control and building points patiently. From day one of the tournament, the Spaniard had already mentioned he noticed the courts felt different, less slow and more demanding for his game. And it showed. He wasn't the dominant Alcaraz we saw in previous editions, and his game looked more rushed and uncomfortable. In contrast, Jack Draper felt right at home. His direct style, powerful serve, and aggressive movement were perfectly suited to the tournament's new conditions. So, several elements came together: poor tactical preparation, an opponent in top form, a less favorable surface, and a forgettable start. Carlos Alcaraz, with the maturity that defines him, has already acknowledged his mistakes, and now only one thing remains: turn the page and focus on Miami, where he'll have a new chance to prove why he's still one of this generation's top players. Carlos Alcaraz came to Indian Wells with a clear mission: defend his crown and go for a historic three-peat. But Jack Draper stood in his way with a performance that not only eliminated him in the semifinals but also cost him the 600 points he was defending as last year's champion. The loss is a real blow for the Mercian, who not only loses ground but sees Jannik Sinner pull further ahead at the top of the ATP rankings. The Italian, currently serving a 3-month suspension for doping, didn't play at Indian Wells. But still came out looking like the big winner. Why? Because neither Alcaraz nor Zverev, his main chasers, could take advantage. Zverev lost in his debut, dropped 190 points, and Alcaraz, by losing in the semis, missed a golden chance to close the gap. Sinner, without leaving his sofa, begins his 41st week as world number 1, tying Andy Murray and Weeks at the top and solidifying himself as the current reference point on tour. Meanwhile, on the women's tour, the story hasn't been much different. Indian Wells also took a toll on Paula Badosa, who couldn't compete due to a new back injury, the same one that has already ruined several of her seasons. The Catalan, who had real chances of returning to the top 10, was overtaken in the rankings by young American Emma Navarro, who gained over 100 points on her thanks to her tournament run. Badosa falls to 11th in the WTA rankings, and to get back into the top 10, she'll need to quickly regain form and start racking up points in upcoming tournaments. But her physical condition remains a big question mark. Since her return, she's shown good form at times, but every time she seems back, her back flares up again. This time, she couldn't even give it a shot. And speaking of surprises, Mira Andreeva has been the earthquake in the women's draw. The 17-year-old Russian not only beat Sabalenka in the semifinals, but also claimed the Indian Wells title and jumped from world number 11 to number 6, directly displacing Badosa. It's her second title of the season, and she's already emerging as the next big threat in the WTA. Interestingly, despite losing, Sabalenka also came out ahead. The loss didn't cost her the number 1 ranking, and seeing how others like Iga Swiatek and Coco Gauff dropped points, her position actually got stronger. The Belarusian didn't have the dream ending, but she remains firmly at the top of the rankings. That said, Andreeva's rise is starting to make noise, and a change in hierarchy in the coming months wouldn't be a surprise. In that context, both Swiatek and Gauff also lost significant ground. Indian Wells was a tournament of extremes. Those who won, did so with authority, and those who stumbled, paid dearly in points and confidence. For players like Badosa, who were making comebacks, falling out of the top 10 could hit them mentally just as much as physically. What's striking is that, through different paths, Carlos Alcaraz and Paula Badosa are united by the same drama. Indian Wells punished them both. For Carlitos, it was the end of a historic streak and a harsh blow to his dream of returning to world number 1. For Paula, a new setback at a time when she seemed ready to return to the elite. Two huge talents now sharing the frustration of a tournament that seemed tailor-made for them. And ended up being quite the opposite. Now, both must look forward. Alcaraz gets a quick shot at redemption at the Miami Masters 1000, where he's also defending big points. Badosa, on the other hand, will need to see how her back responds and whether she's ready to compete at the highest level. The calendar waits for no one, and the points lost in the desert must be earned back on the court. And you, do you think Alcaraz can bounce back in Miami? Will Badosa return to the top 10 if she stays healthy? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you're enjoying the content, you know what to do. subscribe, leave a like, and turn on the notifications to follow tennis like never before. Indian Wells 2025 has been anything but predictable. Carlos Alcaraz and Paula Badosa arrived with high hopes, but leave with more doubts than answers. While Draper and Andreeva lifted the trophies and shook up the rankings, Spain's two tennis stars saw their paths get more complicated. The first, by a loss that distances him from the throne, the second, by an injury that prevents her from fighting for what she knows she can achieve. But that's tennis for you, it gives you a chance for revenge every week. And both Alcaraz and Badosa have shown that, when they're at 100%, they can compete with anyone. Indian Wells was a setback. But the season goes on. That's all from Indian Wells for today, where the surprises haven't stopped and the rankings have taken a major turn. If you like this video, subscribe, hit the like button, and let us know in the comments what you think will be the next big move on tour. See you in the next episode with more drama, more analysis, and more top-tier tennis. See you next time.